Quick question. Do we have the client's budget? Wait, which version of the intake did they fill out? I thought that was already confirmed. Those aren't communication problems, they're not people problems, and they're definitely not motivation problems. They're intake workflow problems. Because when intake isn't designed, your team fills in the gaps, and every person fills them in differently. Today, we're fixing that. Welcome back to Tech Talks with Grace, the show where we turn operational chaos into clarity one system at a time. In the last episode, we talked about why intake is the most important system in your business. Today, we're taking the next step. This episode is called Designing a Clear, Consistent Intake Workflow. Because knowing intake matters is one thing. Designing it so it actually works for your team, your clients, and your systems is something else entirely. By the end of this episode, you'll know what a real intake workflow includes, why most intake workflows fail without anyone noticing, how to design intake that supports automation and delivery, and how to improve yours without starting over. Let's get into it. Intake is a workflow, not a form. Most businesses think intake equals a form. That's the first mistake. A form is just one step in a workflow. Intake is the entire sequence that answers where information enters, how it's validated, where it goes next, when work is allowed to begin. When intake is treated as just a form, here's what happens. Information enters without structure. No one knows what quote unquote complete means. Teams assume someone else checked it. Automation triggers inconsistently. And delivery will start too early or too late. A real intake workflow has boundaries. It clearly answers what must exist before work starts, what happens if information is missing, who owns each step, where the system, not a person, takes over. If intake doesn't have a defined path, your business runs on improvisation. Again, if intake doesn't have a defined path, your business runs on improvisation. Let's break this down. Every strong intake workflow has 5 core components. The first one, a single entry point. This doesn't mean only one channel, but it does mean one canonical path. Basically, whether information comes from a call, a form, a referral, a sales conversation, it must land in one standardized intake process. Multiple entry points without normalization create data drift. The second component of a strong intake workflow is structured data collection. Free text fields, flexible. It's also where clarity goes to die. Strong intake uses defined fields, clear options, required inputs, and consistent formats. This isn't about control, it's about reliability. The third component, validation before progress. A strong intake workflow has a checkpoint. Before work starts, the system asks, is this complete? Does it meet our criteria? Is anything missing? No validation means problems move downstream. The fourth component, a clear intake complete state. This is critical and almost always missing. Your workflow must clearly define, quote, this intake is complete, accurate, and ready, end quote. Without this, work starts on assumptions. The fifth component, a defined handoff. Once intake is complete, data moves automatically. Ownership shifts clearly, and the next steps trigger reliably. This is where automation finally works. Let's get into a case study. I want to tell you about Northbridge Advisory, a consulting firm. Their problem was they complained about slow project starts, confused teams, repeated clarification calls, but their intake looked fine. Once we dug in, what did we find? We found that they had a form, a kickoff call, and a CRM entry, but no workflow. So what happened to the information? Information was collected in different orders, they stored it in different places, and they had different people confirming different components of it. No one knew when intake was actually complete. How did we fix this? The fix was not adding new tools. They just redesigned the intake with purpose. How did they accomplish this? That's the question you're going to ask right now. They defined one intake path. They standardized required fields. They created a validation checklist. They added an intake complete status. And they also automated the handoff to delivery. What was the result? Projects started on time. They had fewer internal questions, higher client confidence, of course, and the automation finally held. So the lesson learned here, consistency doesn't come from effort. It comes from intentional design. That brings us to the next section, which is designing the intake for humans and your system. And this is where most people get stuck. They design intake for humans or for systems. A strong intake works for both. For humans, you need clear questions, a logical flow, no duplicate requests, and predictable next steps. For systems, the requirements are structured fields, required inputs, clear triggers, and reliable handoffs. So when intake is designed well, people trust the systems trust the data, and automation becomes safe. This is how intake becomes a force multiplier. Let's make this practical. Here's what I want you to do next. Step 1, I want you to map your intake workflow, not just the form as we discussed. I want you to write down all entry points, every part where you collect data, all your validation points, wherever it is that you actually check that something is correct. Do you have a completion status, whatever it might be, or what you currently have, and the handoff path. So this is what you're writing down. Again, not just the form, the entry points, data collection points, validation points, completion points, and handoff points. I want you to see the whole path. Now, the second step here, you're going to identify one inconsistency. And you're going to ask yourself these 3 questions. Where does intake vary? Where do people improvise? And where does data change the format? This is going to be your weak spot. The third step I want you to take is to simplify and standardize. Remember, we like one, right? So you're going to choose one improvement on your intake process. You're going to create one required field. You're going to create one validation rule and one standardized step. Remember, the small changes here unlock everything else. Micro actions lead to macro impact. So while this might be a short podcast, the reason I'm only focusing on one is the same as all my previous podcasts. I want you to make a micro change to have a macro impact. And this is going to allow you to clear up everything downstream. So what comes next? Here's what I'd like you to remember. A clear intake workflow reduces friction. It will protect your team. It's going to improve the client experience. And that is what makes automation possible. You don't need more tools. You need clearer first steps. So we're going to continue on with Pillar 5. Today, you learned how to design a clear, consistent intake workflow. And the next episode is going to allow you to go even deeper. We're going to speak about aligning your intake tools, things like forms, calendars, CRMs, and communication, so they all work as one single system, not 5 completely disconnected ones. I'm Grace, and this is Tech Talks with Grace.